Hi, everyone. Our next guest is Brenda Crouch. She is a TV host, speaker, author, and singer-songwriter who shares a dynamic message of healing and restoration along with her husband, American Christian broadcaster and film producer Paul Crouch Jr. An iron fist and a velvet glove, Brenda's best-selling book, Fight Forward, Reclaim the Real You, frees people to experience their God-given identity and ultimate purpose.
To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meyer Clinic's podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Everyone, we are back and we have a wonderful guest today. And of course, I'm here with Dr. Lisa Day. Hi, Lisa.
Hello. Hi there.
Our guest today is Brenda Crouch, as you just heard. And Brenda, thanks so much for coming on the Meyer Clinic's podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Kristin, for having me. It's an honor.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Lisa Day, I would love for you to share what I was listening to you say after reading Brenda's book and me thinking, oh, wait, let's record that. That was really good. So will you go ahead and...
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And so what I was saying is that, Kristin, you and I have been so very focused on the big project that we did in Michigan, and it was such a beautiful success. And I knew that we were going to be doing this podcast, but Brenda, I had not read your book. And again, before I do any podcasts, I want to know who I'm speaking to, obviously, and the content of their work. And so I sat down on Sunday thinking I was going to speed read this book just to kind of glance over and to know what the gist of it was, and went from sitting on my bedroom floor to speed read through it to climbing on my bed. I had it on the downloaded book. And I would say that I was blown away. I had goosebumps from head to toe. I read a lot of stuff. I really do, as being a therapist for 25 years and working from our clinics that entire time. And with goosebumps, I would share with you that as I read the book, it was more than clear to me that book was put in my lap, not only to be able to have a podcast with you, but it spoke to me personally and profoundly to so many people who I work with who struggle in abusive dynamics and wonder how, if this God is a God who takes care of us and protects us, how could I possibly find myself in this situation, and how that's internalized. So I want to thank you, Kristin, for putting Brenda and I together to do this podcast. And Brenda, I just want to thank you so much for your work, because it absolutely profoundly touched me personally and professionally. I'll be able to share it with so many people.
Oh, that means the world to me. And thank you so much for sharing that and for taking the time. It is definitely a deeper well, and it's a journey, and that's what I've described it as. So thank you so much. It means a lot.
Absolutely. Tell us how you navigate, because I am struggling with this right now, and Lisa knows this too. How do you navigate the entertainment world, which can be really challenging, especially when you're someone that has faith? How are you navigating that and staying unfettered or what's the resentful or angry? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And I think that to answer that very honestly, there was a time in my life when I was very interjected and wrapped up in the entertainment world and field as an identity, so to speak. And I talk about that in depth in my book. But because of my journey, I have come to a place where I understand that that's not who I am. And so there's nothing really that moves me or shakes me, or the sense of truth that's within me anymore. I'm not impressed by images because I've seen behind them. It's like, the Wizard of Oz, when you finally, the curtain gets pulled back and you really see the truth that's behind the curtain. so, while I certainly don't condemn anyone for being involved in the entertainment industry, I think we need to be a light, and we need to bring good stories, to film. And that's what my husband and I do. That's one aspect of what we do. So we do have our hands dipped in Hollywood, but we also work in Christian media. And so, believe it or not, there are challenges that even come with that behind the scenes. And, because people are looking for platform for their value.
Yes.
And I think this is a real serious issue today. And because I understand the journey of coming unraveled from that, I now can be the compassionate set of eyes and ears that I almost feel like God has me positioned as like the stealth bomber that kind of goes in and can absolutely provide an atmosphere to remove the mask behind the scenes for people to, have a safe place to become vulnerable enough to discover who they really are. Because I don't think that we can really serve our purpose well until we really have that foundation. So there's, I guess to answer your question in a nutshell, I had to explain that to say that I understand that I'm not going to serve my purpose well if I'm caught up in the enamorment of celebrity. And so I think that I see people as people, and I respect the accolades and the accomplishments. I certainly do, but I see people as people, and I have an ability to see beyond the mask.
That's good. I mean, how do you handle, or have you handled, because it's probably gotten more expansive or more understanding the longer you've been dipping into that entertainment world, and you are steeped in it in many ways. How have you handled the challenge of people seeing you and they don't really see you? They see you as what they think that you're going to do for them because you've got this platform.
Yeah. Man, that's such a good question. And thank you for asking it, because
I'm dealing with it too, so I get it.
They say that it's lonely at the top. And I certainly am not projecting that I'm at the top by any stretch of the imagination. But, but God has brought me from, such an unusual background to a place of elevation where I have a platform. And I'm thankful for that. But, when you do have the ability to, or when you're connected to this platform, people do come with agendas.
Yeah.
And I have had to learn because I'm such a trusting soul, and you wouldn't think that I would be, but I think that's kind of because I'm a compassionate person and I am looking for authenticity in people. I desire to have real, authentic relationships. And those are few and far between. I think the ones who can really be in your inner circle are those who just are not coming with that agenda. And I think I've had, over the last few years, it's been a bit of a challenge to adjust to that. But I have felt like within the last 2 years, at least, that something clicked inside of me. And, it's like that next layer, of just the fight of the butterfly, the fight forward of understanding, you know what, I can do this, and it's about what I'm giving to them. And so I guess I'm less in need of that as I once was.
That makes total sense. Lisa, I'm so sorry because I heard you getting ready to
Oh no,
fire
you just you know me, Kristin. I'm always on the edge of my seat going, oh, pick me.
Oh God.
Go for it.
But that was such a good question. Man,
they're
right off the top, too.
Fantastic questions. And I think that, what I think I would love to for you to share with our listeners, Brenda, is that, where you are now is absolutely a reflection of the hard work that you've done. And that when folks have grown up a victim of child abuse or have experienced ongoing abuse, no matter what that dynamic, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual, physical, all of those good things that can really, destroy us, that so many people become very skilled in internalizing that, stuffing those emotions, hiding that hurt. And then these folks present what they believe other people want to see as collected and good and together. And, certainly, in the abused populations, we develop defense mechanisms. And, oftentimes we develop them during our adolescence. And then they go into our adulthood. And so we have this facade that is out there that looks together and looks on top of it, when inside we're crumbling. And, we hide it. And I think it's driven, at least initially, by the need to look okay because we don't feel okay. But in that defense mechanism of choosing not to need anybody, really at a psychological level, it's a form of control. Because to the extent that I need something from somebody, they have control in my life, right? And if someone who I need or someone who's close to me has abused me, how can I protect myself? So not to get too long-winded, but I wonder if you can speak to your journey with regard to internalizing that, hiding that pain, wanting to stay in control of not being hurt again, but how that disintegration, if you will, of character from what people see to what's going on inside in your journey in that.
Well, that's so good. And we really get good at projecting those images, don't we? Because we're fighting so hard to combat what's happening internally. And that was really my own story for so long. And I think that my life is really a bit of a juxtaposition in the sense that, when God calls me to be vulnerable and to be transparent, and I say dangerously transparent, it's what I've understood is that is a gift for those around me who are hurting. And in my reward then is a gift to me. When I hear someone like you say, wow, I sat down and I actually took the time to process this book instead of rush through it, there's a reward there for me for the price that I paid. And I think that the sin, when I said that I learned to not need certain friends. What I mean by that really, and I could have said it better, would be I learned to have boundaries in that I certainly need relationship. We all were made for that. And I have some very precious ones that are gifts to me. But I've learned to understand what people are capable of giving and not need any more from them than that. And so then you're not resentful anymore. In terms of projecting images and coming out of, the good Christian home that by all intents and purposes was a great home. But then there was this secret and this awful thing that, had taken place within my beautiful family that, I had a choice at a certain point that was to say, as I let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, what's my motive? Am I doing this to help others? I wanted to be free, and I wanted others to be free. And so, at the point that I wrote my book, it certainly wasn't for therapy anymore. I was really long past that point. But there's an element of when you know the truth, then you can be set free. And so I think that I want to be an encouragement, and that requires that I maintain the understanding of the beauty that God's given me as a person, but also understand who I am without Him, and that, we all have a choice and we all have an answer, and there is hope. And so I want to be that vessel of hope and to carry His glory in such a manner that I understand what humility is. And humility is to understand who you are, but who you're not. And who I am is someone who's been made in the image of God and given an absolute chance for redemption and restoration.
Well, and I think that you speak to a couple of things that are so very profound. And I think that, and Kristin you and I were talking about this not too long ago, but I think that the natural tendency in the mind is to organize our world as good or bad, right or wrong. And, that comes in our development. Typically we have a good parent or a bad parent or one that's better, and they fall into those roles. And, of paramount importance in the work that I do in my clinic setting is always inviting people to integrate the good and the bad, that there's good and bad in us, there's good and bad in others, and there's good and bad in the world. And what I think is profound, and not only in your writings, but, and certainly in the prayer that you shared with your father, was the ability to extend that grace and integrate that, yes, there were some bad things that happened, but there are also some really, really good things.
Right.
And that, the key that is important to be able to navigate that process, and I emphasize process, is forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that, through forgiveness of other people, and being able to integrate their good parts and their bad parts, we're able to reestablish relationship. But the gift is ours, because then we're also able to embrace the good parts and the bad parts of self and everyone around us. And we no longer have to hide them. So many of us only want to share the good parts of our character and don't want to embrace that we all have character defects and we all have not so good parts. And the freedom that we experience and be able to do that, you just so communicated so very well in your book. It was profound.
Thank you. I think we need to, we're in such an unforgiving and angry society, and we've just got to start allowing each other to be human and allow each other the process. We're not all in the same place on the journey, but we share a common thing, and that is that we all need to be seen and heard and valued and loved.
Absolutely. Well, and it extends. I mean, twice last month, I think it probably had to do with my business travel, but twice last month I paid bills and forgot to sign the checks. That's okay. And so you're like, oh my goodness, who does that, right? And being able to say, no, that's okay, or extending it to the bigger issues. And I know that one of the things that is so freeing, not only in my self-perception, but I love doing this in my relationships with other people, is when they do something wrong, whether it was intentional or accidental, is a phrase that I say, welcome to the human race. Welcome to the human race. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. We can move forward.
That's so good, Lisa. Yeah. So good. I used to beat myself up over those things, and I think I'll go a little easier on myself now.
I do as well. And I think too, look, I have a friend of mine that she was in pain, and she's a friend that no one would want to read these emails because, we're not superstars or anything. So no one could sell them, and we're not politicians. But if anyone found them, we've not held back at all in these emails, basically, which is so great to have friends like that. It's actually 3 friends of mine. We call ourselves the Red Caped Quattro. And she's going through something difficult, dealing with someone really challenging her, and I'm writing back, and we're all writing back, you've got this, you can do this, don't, you held the power here, not this person. And she wrote back and she said, I hear you, and you guys sound so brave, and you sound so on top of it, and I just don't feel like that. I just feel so tired. And as I'm reading it, I'm responding to her, and I'm like, you know what? Everything I wrote, I stand behind, and I'm tired too. I don't feel like I can always handle everything either. So take my sis boom ba rah rah email and take it for what it is. Don't think that that's me, that I've got something handled, because it's okay to not always have everything handled, because that's reality. And that's kind of a new place to sit, where you go, I don't have it all together. I don't have it all together.
Well, and I think being able I think being able to embrace that I don't have it all together comes back to, Brenda, what you were saying, that the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
And, I know that I've shared this with you before, Kristin, but one of the things that I teach, and I certainly practice in my own life, is that to the extent that we know our truth, good, bad, right, wrong, or ugly, but to the extent that we know our truth and we honor that truth and we respect that truth, or in your case, Brenda, I mobilize that truth because others can grow and benefit from it, I believe we thrive.
Right.
But on the other side, I think that to the extent that we know our truth and we operate in a manner that's inconsistent with that truth, we have chaos and drama. And that really shined to me as I was reading your book. That, as a young child, you had this truth and it presented in your dreams, and you couldn't really make sense of it. And there were some pieces that weren't fitting, and there were some dynamics within the family. And yet the family looked beautiful on the outside, yet there was this gnawing pain on the inside. And what really spoke to me, and I have goosebumps as I'm sharing this, is that in your growth process, at least from an outsider's observation, you were able to integrate that truth and no longer live in a manner that was inconsistent. You sought that truth. And then when you had that truth, you didn't beat it into the ground. You used it to free yourself so that you could grow more authentically, with your family members, which is just beautiful. It's just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. And don't you think it's important? I mean, often what we need from someone is to be human and to just sit and hear us or just be with us when we're in our pain. And so people that have experienced pain have that kind of compassion, and they're able to do that and just hold your hand. Sometimes we don't need just a bunch of clinical advice, but we just need for someone to just love us through it.
Oh, absolutely. And in this podcast today, we think of it from the victim or the one who's on the receiving end of bad. But oftentimes, I work a lot in the field of addiction.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
I work with someone, for instance, they'll come in and they will have gotten a DUI, right? And they're not someone who is traditionally irresponsible or an addict, but even if they were, and to be able to look them in the eyes and say, it's okay. It's okay. This is something that you did. It's not something who you are. And to live in that shame and guilt and remorse only fuels, the shame.
There you go.
But to be able to embrace that, I made a choice that was not a good choice, and I can make a difference moving forward. I can live in that shame and hide from it. Yeah, or I can embrace it and say, I am human and I did make a mistake and I have remorse for it and I want to grow forward. And there's healing, and God offers that healing. He offers that healing for us, all of us.
Yeah. It's our shame that keeps us trapped in the same cycles when we're doing that self-condemnation, and so that is so powerful.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that John Bradshaw, he's written a number of books, but one of my faves that he's written is Healing the Shame That Binds. And, I think that my main takeaway, though there was many takeaways from his work, is that we get lost in the question of why. In your case, Brenda, why did Dad do that? Or why did Dad's family do that? And we get stuck in that. And I tell folks, what answer to that question is going to make you feel any better? Follow me. It has occurred. And so, with Bradshaw's guidance, for years I've used this. We do want to ask why so we can gain an understanding of injury or impact that things have had. But we really want to move into the how. Given the why, how can we move forward? How can we find healing? How can we heal? And it's just when we can change our focus from the why, which causes us to loop and perseverate and get resentful and bitter, harden our own heart, when we can move forward through forgiveness and integrate grace and into the how, everybody benefits. The person who did the offending, the person who's on the receiving end of it. It's the true meaning of God's love, of grace.
That's right. And I really feel like what helped me so much was the how and the why kind of came together whenever I realized, we've got to understand there's a bigger picture here, and who's the real enemy. Good and evil exists, and we've got to understand what are our weapons and how do we combat this and how do we break these cycles. And so, my heart for healing for people is just as much for the victimizer who was once a victim, who needs to break a cycle, who needs to come free. And is absolutely got to be filled with shame. I know my father was. I mean, he couldn't hardly confess on his deathbed. It took everything ounce of courage in him to do it. And for that, I say, bravo, you did it. And I think if we can come to that place sooner in our lives where, hurting people hurt people. And when we realize that about ourselves, then we can, come and step into the light is what I keep saying. Just step into the light of God and the love of God, where you can be that broken human and know that what he did for you is enough, and he will complete you and fulfill you and completely turn what the enemy meant for harm and use it for good if you love him. So that was, go ahead.
That rings so true for me, because as a young child, my mother would always say, what the enemy intends for destruction, the Lord will use for good.
Yes.
And, as a therapist and as someone who's been in the healing field for, 25, 30 years, and with Meyer that long, I've also come to the place where I say, beware, because the greater your work, the greater your attack. Because
that's so true.
I practice everything that I teach, and yet the trials continue to come. And, just the other day, and I have a very close relationship with my mother, and just the other day, and my family has been through a significant challenge with one of my daughters. And my mom's, how are you doing with that? And I said, Mom, I said, it just shows up as it has throughout my entire life, beginning with my own trauma in childhood, in that everything the enemy has used to try to take me down and take me down roads of destruction, by keeping my eyes on the Lord. And my go-to is thy will be done. I can do all things through Christ to strengthen me, thy will be done. And I just keep my eyes on him and see it as a challenge of faith. But notoriously, every challenge that I've been through, and being willing and open to say, show me, guide me, teach me. Not one of those trials has not been used with multitudes of clients that I work with. Meaning, I not only know this from a clinical perspective, I know it from a personal perspective. And in that, it's a gift. And so, do you look back and are you grateful for all the horrible things that have happened to us? No. But am I personally grateful for the tools and the skills that I've learned and the growth that I've had, and how I can share that with others and have that empathic heart? Forever grateful, because the stuff I learned, you'd never learn in a book. You'd never learn it in a book.
That's right. That's right. So good. I appreciate, and every time I hear that, I just celebrate. It's something inside me just leaps with joy, because that's our gift. But it is a choice, and we have to fight for it.
We do. And it's an interesting life to get to a place where you really you figured out what part of your soul's purpose is, or your mission, whatever anybody wants to call it. And you really do serve that mission, which is about, your faith, if that's where you're coming from, or your, serving other people, whatever that is. When you really are there, sometimes people do look at you like you're kind of cuckoo, because they don't understand what.
It's true. No, it's true.
Yeah. You're just like, you just kind of get used to having people not really believe that you really mean that, or that just I've had people, and I'm sure some of them haven't meant to be insulting, and some of them probably have, where they've been like, how do you do what you do? And some of them say, tinged with the way they say it, I think, is this because you think I'm some kind of dodo head that you can't believe I can do what I do? Because that's how they say it, how do you do this? And I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to that.
I think that comes back to what Brenda was saying earlier, in that I believe that the healthier our boundaries, the less time we spend angry, because we choose not to take it personally. Yeah, we see it as a reflection, of their character.
But if we're tired and we do take it personally, it's okay too.
Yeah. Well, I say that choosing to not take things personally is like choosing to use a Phillips head screwdriver. It's a coping mechanism.
My goodness, that's good.
We pick it up and we say, I'm going to choose not to take this personally. And not in an effort not to feel. We still need to take those feelings into relationship. Yeah. But it's a choice. Yeah. It's certainly a choice.
And that's part of our, our toolbox. What are the tools that we're using to get through each day with wisdom, with discernment, and with purpose? So that's such a good analogy. And I think too, to take that thought one step further, not just our circles, but even this kind of Me Too culture that is almost shaping the new narrative in our society. And I think that it's very good that we've opened up the conversation, where we've brought this to the table, but it's not going to be good if we just stay in a place where we're, throwing our fists in the air, we're angry, we all remain victims, and we just want to, expose the monster, instead of being brave enough to approach this from a higher perspective, a bigger perspective, and saying, how do we heal our world? How do we heal this generation and the generations that came before us? You know, it's in our bloodlines. And so I think this is a very serious issue that we have to approach it sometimes with humor. And we have to understand that, you know, for me personally, I love there's a scripture that says that he will take the weak and the foolish and abased things of this world to confound the wise. And, you know, I have to remind myself of that whenever I do silly things. And I think, oh, you know, I wish I was the scholastic intellect. And, you know, I think I'm a smart person, but, you know, I'm not that. Yeah, I have a trail of broken dreams and failures behind me, and yet look at God, look at what He does, and He makes all things new again. And so, I think we just have to remind ourselves that it's a humble journey, you know, when we are carriers of His truth in that light.
Brenda, I wonder, you know, so one of the scriptures, or my paraphrasing of the scripture, I wonder if you can speak to it, where we're taught that we know the love of the Lord who has no flesh through those around us who do, and the confusing component of when the hurts come from our Father here on earth, and how that confounds or complicates our relationship with our Father in heaven.
It absolutely does, and this is probably one of my biggest burdens, you know, for parents and for those who are influencers. And I think that, you know, ultimately we can circle back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, the mysteries of God. I mean, God is so complex, and yet He's so simple. He's to me, this big kind of, He's the Alpha and Omega, this juxtaposed figure. And we're never going to really truly understand Him, but as we get to know Him, we begin to understand the way He works. And He can use flawed people and broken things. We see it all the time in our society. You know, on every level. And so I think that what happens as we navigate through these landmines, so to speak, in relationships, and we have to learn how to heal our wounds that come from them, is as we get closer to Him and allow His truth to heal us, then we are able to understand this concept of humanity. And I love I don't know if you read the foreword in my book written by Dr. Mark Sharona, who has a double doctorate, one in psychology, and he wrote about how that we're becoming fully human.
Yes.
And we're on this journey. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing to say. I've never heard that before. And, you know, to think about what was the idea and the concept of man from creation, you know, that's what we're returning to. That's what we're aspiring to get back to, you know, where Adam and Eve in the garden, what they were created to be and how they were designed to walk in this authority and dominion. And I think that because of people feel powerless and they're filled with fear, you know, that's our broken system. And so it's about changing our mindsets and being transformed from the inside out. And in so doing, we become the humans that we were supposed to be, little by little. You know, it's a process, you know, but I don't know if I even answered your question, but
well, and I would say not only do I think it's a process, but I believe it's a practice, because I believe, I believe secondary to the fall and the fact that we are broken, that, you know, untamed, we go back to our greatest dysfunction. And, you know, I think that, we all over scripture, we read about disciplining the mind, and how I teach that in my practice is that what you think you become, your thoughts will create your reality. And, you know, really discipline that our mind is a beautiful mind, but it can go to very broken places where we are constantly dissecting not only ourselves, but those around us. But when we choose to look at, this is something that was given to me years ago, and it was definitely given to me by the Lord by walking Green Lake back when I lived in Seattle. And I was having a very challenging situation in my life with a very good friend who really did me wrong. And the message was very clear. And if you guys were here, or you'd see me hold my hands up to show you visually what it looks like. But he said, Lisa, I challenge you to look for something to love and to leave something lovable in every path that you cross. And the cross I see is Jesus Christ, the cross. So to look for something to love and to leave something lovable in every path that you crossed. You see, we are not called to judge, but we're called to love. And that was spoken to me many, many moons ago. But I get goosebumps as I share it, because it has been so profound. Yeah. And finding grace. And when people do wrong, and boy, in the field of psychology, I deal with a lot of people who do really bad things. Going to visit a young man in jail, and it's that I can love you because I don't need to decide what you've done or to judge what you've done, but I can help provide a space for your healing, provide that grace, for your healing. It's huge. But, in that process too, Brenda, when you spoke to powerlessness, I think that it's so very important, because when we've been on the receiving end, and I think all three of us here know that we are absolutely powerless over some of the horrific things that have happened to us in our journey. And so, I always take my hands again that, when we come to these challenges in life, we need to be able to clearly delineate where we are powerless and where we have influence. But the key in that is that when we are powerless, we don't then deny those feelings. I tell anybody who comes in my office, if I ever teach you not to feel, you should fire me. But we have to be able to embrace that we are powerless. And in that gap in between, the gap in between powerlessness and where we have influence, those are the feelings that we take into relationship or into the light, as you say, to find healing, to have that grace, to have that forgiveness, to have that grieving, if you will, of what has happened.
That's so good. And as we learn to become motivated by love, I mean, love is our power. We've got it all wrong in our culture. We think that power means money and platform and all this other stuff that we're reaching for the wrong tools and often hurting others in the wake of our journey. But I think that our pursuit for power, and when love becomes the motivator, there is no greater power than love. So, I mean, think on that one.
Well, and I think that is hugely profound, that if we can come from the place of love, looking for something to love and leaving something lovable. But at the same time, I think that our pursuit for love or our need for love is often the very thing that gets us denying our truth and then having the follow-up of chaos and drama. So I think it's, so in true. That journey, that we want to bring love, but we also have to be aware of our own need for love can cause us to trip and to get stuck and to seek, human validation. Yeah.
Yes, which is exactly what I was going back to earlier when I said I learned not to need the human form, because my cup got filled when I understood. And that's why having a relationship with God is so important, because He is the source of love. And when that inner cup, that void gets filled up and your narrative begins to change, you have something to give, and you're so much less needy than you once were, and you're not codependent anymore.
Right.
I think about that. To me, there's no other way to break that cycle.
Absolutely. And I think about too, when I've heard people say, I really operate from the center of my being. And, that can be interpreted in so many ways, but how I take that is, okay, I believe in something greater than myself. I practice self-care. I go to counseling if needed. I do things in service of others. Sure, I falter, but then I, right myself. Yeah. But I'm not walking around as this wound that is grasping, grasping. And it's so, and it takes work. When I said something about this the other day to someone who said, well, maybe I'll go to counseling, but I'm just going to tough it out. And I could hear the stigma, in their voice. And I don't judge about that stuff anymore, because I know it's there. This is why I do what I do, because I'm trying to get people to not think that you're weak for going to counseling.
Right.
It's like the toughest people, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps people, the marathon of life people are the ones that will go do that work. They aren't necessarily the ones that won't do it. And that's where that whole opposition is. It's like, once you cross that bridge and you go, yes, I do live from this center, so I'm not constantly in lack mode. And I see how strong I am that I will go get help.
Well, I think that too, though, in that process, Kristin, I think that people are afraid to get help because I think that,
Absolutely.
in our journeys that some of us have been hurt so very badly that we self-preserve. We become our own protector,
Oh, yeah.
our own guardian.
yeah.
We're not going to let anybody in because that way we're not going to get hurt. And unfortunately, that interferes with not only bringing into the light our brokenness and not only seeking therapy, but unfortunately, it interferes with our relationship with the Lord because we're so self-preserving and we come up with a schema of operating that's going to keep us safe that it prevents our growth. So, I always say that fear is the number one prohibitor of growth. But when we've been on the receiving end of trauma, we're afraid. We're afraid of therapy.
Absolutely.
We're afraid of vulnerability because that could mean we could be injured further.
That's so good. You both said that so well. And it is such work. It takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've encouraged people is that, listen, what you're fighting for is you. And be courageous and do this for you. Do it for yourself. Because it's really it's trickery. It's deception to think that it's not worth it. It's hard work and it's not always comfortable. But, the truth sometimes hurts, but then that's followed by freedom. And wow, there's nothing can replace. You can't put a price on that.
Oh, absolutely not.
Well, I tell people, Brenda, that if you're going, so for many people who come in with trauma, I'm pretty honest and I flat out say, that this isn't an easy process. And in fact, particularly when the trauma is at the hands of our parents, I say to them that if you're able to do this work, I promise you, it will be the hardest thing you've ever done because it's going to go dynamically against every protective dynamic that you've created for your operating system. Yeah. It will not be void of pain. Yeah, it will not. Yeah. I say the pathway to wisdom, is not void of pain, but what we experience on the other side is a freedom beyond all knowing. It's just a freedom.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, Lisa, I think about those who have siblings, because we come from family systems. And when one person is a catalyst, and they're the monkey wrench that's kind of saying, something's wrong here, it can cause this ripple effect that is not comfortable. And it can take years sometimes for that to process. But the beauty of knowing that God is the one that you've allowed him to be in control and you've stepped back from that place of control that you once tried to be, is to know and have the peace that they will journey to with you and that they'll get there. And I've watched, members of my own family who have come free, are coming free. And to me, that's another part of the reward, for having the courage to do the hard work and to say, you can do it too.
Absolutely. I want to make sure, Brenda, that our listeners know about your podcast.
Okay.
So can you, because I didn't talk about that when I was introducing you. So can you tell them what the name of it is and how often you do it and where they can find it?
Yeah, actually the podcast is brand new. I'm in I've got all my radio interviews on my podcast right now, which you can find at my website, brendacrouch.com. And we are scripting to begin to shoot video podcasts where I feel like, you ladies are a rare breed. Not everybody understands the intention behind my book, Fight Forward. And so I want to do this Fight Forward podcast where I delve into this subject more and I'm able to kind of explain the real message, because I don't want people to limit this as that I'm just trying to just tell my story. I'm just a victim of abuse. And there's just so much more to it. And I feel like there are some answers and tools that are given in here from a very practical and faith-based viewpoint that will help people and it'll encourage people. And I encourage them to find counselors who are experienced in this area. So I do point them to people like you. But that's what the new podcast will be. It's a video podcast. We're so excited about it. Yeah. And I've got other interviews on my podcast right now, but you can find that at brendacrouch.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And
It's been a pleasure, and
Oh,
I feel like I just made 2 new friends.
Yeah.
The only thing we need to do is do this in person someday. I would
Yes,
love
and
to
have
sit
Maureen
together and chat. Yeah.
have Maureen come. We've been
Yeah.
doing Lisa and I have been
yeah.
doing filmed things too, and that's been a big interesting endeavor, which you were saying, but
Gotta
because
hear more about that.
of only one reason, because it reaches another audience. Never
Yes,
go
good
away
for
from
you.
audio, but
Oh,
reaching that other audience that film brings in. So yeah, maybe we
awesome.
all will sit down. We've got Maureen, running around being our consultant and working for us, and pushing what we do out to places like Truly and Sony and Chicken Soup for the Soul, and and it's awesome.
She's amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like, I don't know how I got so lucky that she's a part of my life. I'm sure you feel the same way, but we have
likewise.
this contact. So yeah, we will figure that will all happen as it's supposed to. Cause I feel like you all that, the 3 of us will be sitting down having a conversation, and we will forget the camera's there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We got to do it. It'd be, be awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Meyer Clinic's podcast, Brenda.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Been great.
Dr. Lisa Day, of course, my cohort. Thank you for joining me on this as well.
I love it always.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.